Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. I'm so glad to see you all here today, but it is a shame that it couldn't have been under better circumstances. I don't even know where to begin with this one. This is distressing. Let me start from the beginning because yes, last week we did see the release of the latest Cinderella film by Sony, which ended up being sold off to Amazon because Sony didn't feel that the film would make much money at the box office due to the whole panoramic situation that we've got going on. So the latest iteration of this story was released on Amazon last Friday, and I thought it'd be a fun idea to, in addition to filming my review of Cinderella, also come up with this video for you guys where I ranked all of the film versions of Cinderella, where I would go through the clothes and the cinematography and all of that good stuff. Like, I was really excited for the release of this film until I watched it. Until Friday rolled around and I actually watched the film, and honestly I was left bamboozled, I was left befuddled, I was left confused as hell. Like, what did I just watch? And honestly I was quite infuriated by the end of all of this because I had just watched a ton of other Cinderella films that, whilst not perfect, had done the story so much more justice that I felt like I needed to speak up. I felt like I needed to have a change of plans, and so with this came this whole new video idea where I will be discussing the latest Cinderella movie, but at the same time we're also going to be drawing from its predecessors in order to draw comparisons, in order to illustrate my points to you guys, and as a result I feel like it will lead to a more well-balanced analysis of why exactly this latest iteration of the story is so trash, because believe me, it is. But before we delve into all of this, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. And since this is such a niche video, I know that it's only going to be watched by like, what, 5 people, but that's okay. This is for me. And for those of you guys who do happen to enjoy this kind of video, be sure to give it a like. It would really help the channel out. But without further ado, let's get into everything wrong with 2021 Cinderella. So throughout this video, we're going to be going through some crucial categories that I feel make up very important parts of the Cinderella story. And like I said, we're going to be taking a look at how they are presented in other versions of the story and drawing comparisons against the latest iteration of Cinderella. So for the first category up, we're going right back to the beginning of Cinderella's story. That is with her childhood. And we're going to be taking a look at the role of Cinderella's father and mother. Now, one key feature that I almost immediately spotted when it came to this iteration of the story is that it completely dismisses the role of Cinderella's biological parents. This is a key factor, a key factor in Cinderella's story, because the whole point is to establish that her biological parents had this beautiful, magical romance between them that was disrupted by her mother's premature death. In many versions of the story, her mother doesn't even make an appearance, okay? We never even get to see her on screen. Most notably, she was portrayed by Hayley Atwell in the 2015 live-action version of Disney's Cinderella, and I feel like that's the biggest role that Cinderella's biological mother has ever had in a version of her story. And in that version of the story, Cinderella's mother imparted upon her a very key, crucial life lesson that became a part of her own persona, and that was kindness. The idea of being kind, rising above those who would see to make her feel small and completely insignificant, as would be the case with her other family members down the line. But this was a life lesson that she really held on to throughout her life, and it very much supported her during these difficult times that she faced with her stepmother and her evil stepsisters. And whilst whilst I have an issue with that life lesson in and of itself, which we'll discuss when we break down the character of Cinderella on her own, I do feel like that explanation at least makes more sense and lends more credence to the idea that Cinderella would try and latch on to the final thing that she has left of her mother, and that is this idea of being kind despite the difficult times that she faces. It gives us a backbone, a moral backbone for the character that explains somewhat why she is able to uphold such abuse throughout her life. Now, this is of course a traditional fairy tale that's very flawed, and so of course the mother figure dies very early on in Cinderella's life and she is just kind of swept away, and in comes the evil stepmother. But before we get into the evil stepmother herself, we need to discuss Cinderella's father, because he is yet another key figure in her life that is supposed to represent the happier days. The key thing to note when it comes to Cinderella's father is that he marries Cinderella's stepmother, the evil stepmother, because he wants a maternal figure to be around in Cinderella's life. That is something that is made very clear in the 1950 animated version of the film and is continued throughout several versions of this story. And that's something that is entirely lacking in this 2021 iteration of the story. There is no explanation. There is no such justification for why Cinderella's father would end up marrying the evil stepmother. Now, some could say it's self-explanatory, but that is one of my biggest issues when it comes to this newest version of this story, that it takes for granted the fact that the Cinderella story has become such a huge part of pop culture. It's something that we just know through osmosis, and so it doesn't introduce any new ideas to it. It doesn't actually take the time to fully build a story that is completely separate from the lore surrounding Cinderella that we already know from pop culture. You can't go into this film and have a full understanding of this story without already having seen other versions of this story, which this film clearly presumes you have. Now, another key factor when it comes to Cinderella's father is that he played the role of the paternal breadwinner of the family. And that's very much made clear in iterations of the story like Ever After and a Cinderella story from, I believe, like 2004 or something, this one that stars Hilary Duff. We're going to be referencing that version quite a few times. You might be surprised to hear it. But in those films, it is made very clear that Cinderella's father really cared about her and about her future and had measures in place just in case that something would go wrong in her life to ensure that she would be financially secure. And part of the evil of the stepmother, which again we will discuss, part of the evil of the stepmother is that she misuses these funds, or she obscures them from Cinderella's knowledge in order to further harm her and abuse her and diminish her within her own household. This is a very key part of the Cinderella story that I feel this 2021 version completely, entirely omits. Now, this is best contextualized in the case of a Cinderella story where we see these events play out in the modern day, and it's made clear that Cinderella's father had actually left the diner as well as the property, everything in Cinderella's name, and this was co-signed. This was co-signed by the stepmother. And that again is the true evil that the stepmother demonstrates in that film, is the fact that she ripped away a ton of Cinderella's opportunities and her financial security for her own gain. And that is why, despite him being so absent in Cinderella's story by the time that we meet her, Cinderella's father does actually play a very important role in the series of events that play out. Before we delve into the evil stepmother and any of these other characters, we can't go any further without diving into Cinderella herself. Okay, now this is like a whole mess of a situation. I can't quite pinpoint what annoys me the most about the 2021 version of this story. I would definitely say that the girl boss angle of Cinderella is definitely up there. It's definitely up there on my list of things that annoyed me the most about this film. Because what? Okay, so girl boss Cinderella follows suit in this trend that we've been seeing in Hollywood, where they try to reimagine these female characters that appear in fairy tales fairy tales that tend to perpetuate these paternalistic ideals that are very unmodern at this point and very unfeminist. They try to retcon these female characters in these stories by kind of making them more feminist friendly, but like I don't even want to say that because that is truly an insult to like third wave feminism. Whatever. The problem that I have with this phenomena that we have seen in Hollywood, like for example in the case of Jasmine in the live action version of Aladdin, where in that film she is determined and motivated to become the Sultan despite the fact that she barely has any skills and any qualifications to do so. Although to be fair, she can't be any worse than her father, who seems to have no skills and no qualifications to be Sultan, but I digress. The issue with this version of feminism that we're seeing in these fairy tales is that they are just so superficial, they are so meaningless, they are so pandering that they actually don't make sense in the story. I could go on and on about the situation with the live action Jasmine, but this isn't her video. Instead, I'm going to go on and on about Cinderella. In this version, her motivation is not to marry a prince because that would be very archaic and unfeminist, right? So instead, she actually wants to become an entrepreneur. She wants to start her own store full of her own designs. And that sounds fine and dandy, except this is a Cinderella story and that literally makes no sense. What does the prince have to do with that? And the film kind of knows this because it ends up turning the ball that's supposed to be the search for the prince's bride into a networking event for Cinderella. I understand the need for modernizing this story. As I said, a lot of things have changed since 1950, where we first saw Disney's animated version of the story. A lot of social and political movements have taken place since then. Modern day audiences, for the most part, do expect better female representation on screen that is more in line with the ideology of the day. And so it does make sense that we have a Cinderella who does want to be an entrepreneur and who is trying to break the glass ceiling. And it is something that we have seen before, especially in the versions of the story that take place in the modern day, a lot of which were actually made in the early 2000s. In the case of a Cinderella story starring Hilary Duff, her iteration of the character, who is called Sam, is a straight A student and she has big dreams to go to college, or more specifically to Princeton, because that's the tie-in with the prince. Like that's, you know, where do princesses go? They go to Princeton. Anyway, she actually has those dreams and ambitions that are more in line with what we would expect the messaging to be towards young girls these days. But in the case of this Cinderella, whilst it is admirable that she wants to be a fashion designer, it doesn't actually make sense in the context of her story. It's made very clear that in this world, women aren't allowed to have enterprises. They're not allowed to have any businesses whatsoever. So the idea that she would be the only one to come up with this idea, like, okay, fine, I'll give her the benefit of the doubt for that. But then also, where is she getting these materials? Where is she getting these materials? I'm seeing her design all of these dresses and like coming up with all of this tulle, all of these fancy materials that she in no way would be able to afford. Remember, the whole point of Cinderella is that she is impoverished in her own estate. The fact that she has access to these materials is very questionable and again goes against the whole purpose of the character. And speaking of superficially feminist ideology, the whole girl boss movement is just like, nah, it's like dead on rights at this point. Like, can we please move on from that? This idea that being able to start your own business as a woman or leaning in as a woman is going to solve misogyny, is going to solve the patriarchy. Like, it absolutely isn't. It's just yet another gender leaning into patriarchal values of capitalism. That's all it is. That's literally all it is. It's like, why only have one gender in society partaking in capitalism when both genders, or all genders, actually no, it's not that inclusive, where both genders can actually partake in order to boost the economy? That's literally all that girl boss energy really means. So essentially here with this girl boss Cinderella, you have a Cinderella who's out to make it on her own. She isn't interested in implementing institutional changes that could affect the lives of thousands or millions in her community, and that is in large contrast to Drew Barrymore, mentors Cinderella in Ever After, who comments on the institutional issues that her society has and tries to convince the prince to see it from her perspective and from the perspective of the impoverished. The fact that I'm so ride or die for Cinderella in this video is actually kind of crazy, and more a commentary on how much this film annoyed the hell out of me as opposed to how much I actually enjoy the character, because like she's not my favorite Disney princess, not even in like the top 5. Like, I don't usually care, and all I wanted to do was have fun and compare the different iterations of the story in order to celebrate the latest version that was due to drop on Amazon on Friday. That was my intention going into this exercise, but unfortunately after seeing this latest version, it just changed. Okay, one of the reasons why I've never really loved the character of Cinderella to begin with is because I've always found it so frustrating to see her endure so much abuse and to be so belittled in her own household. I can't bear it. I literally just can't watch it. And in the case for the 2015 film, where, as I said, it's made clear that this kind of comportment, this kind of meekness is instilled upon her by her mother, it made me even angrier, because I was like, why would you leave your daughter with that kind of lesson where she becomes meek her entire life? And I'm sure that's not what her mother wanted for her, but that's what ended up happening. And it was all kind of because of her and the lesson that she imparted upon her. So it's kind of frustrating to watch, honestly. In the case of Camila Cabello's Cinderella, she's not like the other girls. Okay, yet another trope that we have seen time and time again, but she's not like the other girls. Okay, she's a little bit sassier than the other Cinderellas that we have seen, and we've seen some feisty Cinderellas in our day, especially in the case of, say, Drew Barrymore's Cinderella, who is actually turning out to be one of my favorites. I will disclose what my favorite Cinderella movie is at the very end, but we have seen that kind of vivacious version of Cinderella that is outspoken. But I feel like, once again, when it comes to Drew Barrymore's iteration of the character, she actually has something to stand for. She actually has morals and beliefs and ideologies to stand for that benefit the entirety of society as opposed to just herself. And also, again, because of the lack of backstory when it comes to Cinderella's parents in this new version, you don't actually get an understanding of why Camila Cabello's Cinderella would endure such suffering and such abuse in her household to begin with, considering her otherwise very outspoken personality. Okay, so next up we need to discuss the key component of a Cinderella story, and that is, of course, the evil stepmother and her bumbling stepsisters. As I mentioned before, one of the key aspects of Cinderella's story that often gets overlooked is the fact that her father loved and cared for her so much that he ensured that she would be financially stable in the future, sometimes writing her in his will, or at times even providing, you know, her with like a diner in the case of a Cinderella story, just some sort of measure to ensure that she would be financially supported in the case of his death. And in other iterations of the story, as is the case in Ever After, he may not have explicitly left the entire land to her, but he did leave her with something, you know, something to be, you know, kind of a memorabilia for her. In most versions of this story, the true evil, the moment of true evil that the stepmother exhibits is usually in withholding the thing that her father left behind. I personally feel like a Cinderella story has the most egregious version of this. Perhaps it's just because it's like in the modern day setting and I can contextualize it a bit better. But the fact that Jennifer Coolidge's version of this character had the audacity to not only co-sign the will that stated that Sam would end up with the diner in her own name and with the house in her own name, okay, and then lie about it, acting like she had no idea, that was already bad enough, and that's the big reveal that we find out at the very end. But I thought what was even more insidious in some ways is the fact that she actually held in her hand the Princeton acceptance letter that Sam received, and then edited it, literally just tapped away with her manicured nails, edited it at a computer. And this is like the early 2000s, so we're really trying here. We're trying to destroy this poor girl's life. She edited that letter, or printed out another version which had a rejection letter on it, and she gave it to Sam, just like fully, just completely without remorse whatsoever. And Sam is in tears, thinking about how she's had to juggle working in the diner, being a servant in her own house, I really can't stress this enough, as well as trying to be a straight A student to ensure that she can get into Princeton. And that has all been for naught because she has this rejection letter in front of her. That, I feel like, was one of the cruelest moments that we have ever exhibited from an evil stepmother in a Cinderella story. But again, it may just be because I'm living in the modern era and I can fully understand just how atrocious this sin really is. And a common theme when it comes to the evil stepmothers throughout is that they are always holding Cinderella back, ensuring that she remains in shackles within her own household, living in servitude under them and their daughters. And this, of course, plays into this idea that stepmothers always favor their biological children over their stepchildren. There has been a lot of kind of bounce back towards this idea because, of course, it's not true. There are many mixed families out here in this world, in this modern day. And the idea that step parents can't love their stepchildren as much as they would love their biological children is very much contested and just simply isn't true. But this is a very archaic story, and that's why we see that kind of bias against the step parent. Even though this is clearly anti-stepmother propaganda, we have seen some brilliant portrayals of this character. My personal favorites being Angelica Houston in Ever After. Please talk about perfect casting. And also Bernadette Peters in Roger and Hammerstein's Cinderella. We'll be talking more about that Cinderella very soon, don't you worry. Of course I'll be including it in this video. And another favorite of mine is definitely Jennifer Coolidge in A Cinderella Story. Like, she is pure evil, and like I said, because she's in the modern day, or at least in the early 2000s, she's just so real. Another favorite was, of course, the OG stepmother in the animated Cinderella from 1950. She had this kind of Victorian coldness to her, and she was brilliantly realized in live action by Cate Blanchett in the 2015 iteration of the story. In the 2021 version of this story, we actually have Idina Menzel, the voice of Elsa, famously, but I do feel like she was very well cast, especially when it comes to her talent, especially when it comes to her voice. Her voice is unmatched, okay? But in the case of how she is written, I feel like she's one of the weakest evil stepmothers because she follows suit in yet another trend that we have been seeing in Hollywood, this refusal, this downright rejection of a good old-fashioned black and white evil villain. These days, Hollywood is all about nuance in their villains, which is funny because that's something that the internet actively rejects all the time. But anyways, Hollywood is all about nuance. It's all about the grey as opposed to the black and white. And so they very much play into that idea in this version of the evil stepmother, where it's shown that the only reason why she mistreats Cinderella is because she herself wasn't able to pursue her dreams of playing the piano when she was younger. So of course she has to rob Cinderella of her future in retaliation. But that doesn't make sense, again, because she has two other daughters. Like, why isn't she doing this to her other daughters? She's allowing them to pursue their passions, but why isn't she allowing Cinderella to do so? It also doesn't make sense because she never prevents Cinderella from actually obtaining the materials that she needs in order to design these dresses and in order to actually fabricate them. And in particular, because another feature of the evil stepmother traditionally is that not only does she prevent Cinderella from being able to access any funds or any properties that her father left behind for her, but she is also often guilty of frivolous spending, of wasting these funds on herself and her daughters. This is specifically stated in the 1950 version of the story, where one of the reasons why Cinderella is on her hands and knees cleaning the floors in the first place is because the evil stepmother has taken a ton of money and spent it on herself and on her daughters and has left none for the upkeep of the estate. That is one of the reasons why she is a servant to begin with. with. And that's also a similar case in Ever After, where Drew Barrymore's Cinderella is also made to be a servant. Now, she's not the only servant. There are two other female servants working in the estate, but one of the female servants' husbands ends up getting sold off under false pretenses of like robbery or crime or whatever, because Angelica Houston has been misusing those funds. And we even find out that she's been selling off a ton of the estate's heritage objects to some rich man that she ends up selling off Cinderella to in order to fund her lavish lifestyle. This has been demonstrated throughout these versions of the story. For example, in a Cinderella story, it's beautifully demonstrated in the form of the evil stepmother wasting water during a drought in California just so she can have the greenest lawn in the whole neighborhood. And the camera pans out and we actually see the rest of the households on her street with these brown lawns because they're trying to conserve water, whereas she doesn't care. Now, next up, closely related to the evil stepmother, of course, we must have the bumbling stepsisters, who are another key feature of a Cinderella story. There has been some variation when it comes to the portrayal of the stepsisters. At times, both of them are equally evil. At times, they're both stupid, but not really insidious. And then at times, there's like one especially evil stepsister and the other one who's a bit more sympathetic. And we actually saw this in one of the sequels for the 1950 Cinderella, and one of those ones that went straight to video in the early 2000s. But I think it's called A Twist in Time. That's the better one. We do see one of the stepsisters become a protagonist in her own story and pursue her own Cinderella story. And that's very similar to one of the stepsisters in Ever After, who kind of has her own Cinderella story playing out in the background with one of the, I think, footmen or, servants of the palace. And like I said before, one of the key markers of these stepsisters in a Cinderella story is demonstrating a juxtaposition between how the stepmother treats her biological daughters versus how she treats Cinderella, her stepdaughter. And oftentimes the way that this is demonstrated, as I said, is by the stepmother spending frivolously on them and also having them partake in some kind of lessons. In the case of the 1950 animated version, we have the stepsisters partake in this music lesson where one of them is singing very badly, like very poorly, and that's juxtaposed against Cinderella's angelic singing. We'll talk about the singing in a second. And then in other versions of the story, like a Cinderella story, we actually see them have these kind of synchronized swimming lessons, again playing into the fact that the stepmother is willing to invest in them but not in Cinderella. Another purpose of these lessons is often to demonstrate how inferior they are to Cinderella, almost as if saying that this investment is for naught. Now, in the case of the 2021 version of Cinderella, it feels as though the stepsisters are included here because they have to be, because they're on the cast list. Okay, neither of them have any significant story. There's no attempt to give them any discernible personality traits. Again, I do feel like it's a case where they know the characters and story beats that they need to hit in order for it to qualify as a Cinderella story, but they weren't fully committed to actually doing anything innovative or new with these classic traits. So another key feature that I wanted to discuss when it comes to Cinderella very quickly is the music. Music is a very big part of many of these Cinderella stories, even though not all of these Cinderella films are actually musicals. In the case of the classic 1950 animation, we do of course have that iconic song, "A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes." That's actually one of my favorite songs of all of these Disney animated classics. I think it's very endearing. The rest of the songs in the film, though, I wouldn't say are particularly memorable, and it's not quite that kind of musical anyway. I would say out of all of these Cinderellas, out of all of them, okay, I would say 1,000,000,000,000% the Cinderella with the best music, the best singing, the best music, the best choreography, the best everything, to be quite frank, is Roger and Hammerstein's Cinderella, starring Brandy and Whitney Houston as the fairy godmother. Get out of here. Everyone else go home. Did you hear what I just said? Whitney Houston. Did you hear what I just said? Everyone else go home. Impossible? Please, please. Like who else is doing that? Okay, but even Brandy's Cinderella with her angelic voice has some great musical numbers. The musical number that we have at the beginning where she's in the marketplace and she meets the prince. The prince, by the way, we'll talk about the princes. The prince, by the way, is one of the best princes in all of this lot, okay? But she meets her prince with her angelic voice. And then later on we have the song where she's singing by her chair, this kind of reclusive area where she's allowed to imagine a better life for herself. That song is just so beautiful and bittersweet, and I think very much echoes the sentiment of a dream is a wish your heart makes. This idea of like wishing that you were anywhere but there. Literally anywhere but there. Speaking of anywhere but there, I guess anywhere but here, that is yet another featured song in a Cinderella story that is sung by Hilary Duff. Now in the case of the 2021 movie, it makes the bold choice of being a jukebox musical. Now I actually didn't mind this. This was one of the features of the film that I was actually quite excited about, because little known fact about me, although if you've watched my Hamilton review you'll probably already know this, and also my In the Heights review, but I don't love theatre music, okay? It takes me a while to warm up to it, and in the case of musicals and movie musicals, oftentimes the music doesn't really grab me. A few exceptions to this would be The Greatest Showman and even La La Land, which is a film that I overall had issues with, but the music was there. The music was excellent. It was genius. It deserved all the Academy Awards, okay, make no mistake. But in the case of the recent Cinderella choosing to be a jukebox musical whilst also incorporating some original songs, I feel like it was a nice balance. It was nice to recognize some of these, you know, old songs, but these new renditions of them. I very much enjoyed a couple of new songs that they also included in here. So it was a pretty harmless experiment in my mind. My issue though when it comes to the music in this film is the singing. What is going on? What is actually going on? Camila Cabello, so she's like a singer, right? Like, am I wrong? She's a singer, okay? She had a lot of controversies surrounding her last year when it pertains to a certain word that should never be said, particularly by anyone who's not of that race, okay? But even before that, I've never really paid attention to her career other than, of course, Havana, which is like a bop. Like, I can't make the song not be great, okay? But in the case of her singing in this film, I was actually quite baffled and bamboozled as to why she sounded so auto-tuned. The singing was so overproduced. It sounded so synthetic and unreal and just detached from any kind of emotion and warmth. And I watched the 1950 Cinderella and also Roger and Hammerstein's Cinderella gladly in preparation for this video, and you can just tell the difference immediately. The warmth in these voices, the emotion in these voices, and that's something that is entirely absent from the newest version. And also another side effect of the overproduction of the singing is that it doesn't actually feel like it comes from the characters whilst they're singing on screen. So next up, we're going to talk about an aspect of Cinderella that is a little bit controversial, more so than all of the other aspects of this story, okay? But we need to talk about the mice for a second here. Like, do you mind if I just interject on this little feature of this classic story? Because it has been a long-running joke that has been seen in many a parody that Cinderella is one of those Disney princesses that talks to animals. She's so lonely that she resorts to talking to animals because she's literally lost her mind. That is something that has been parodied time and time again in relation to the character. But I would like to interject here with a different perspective and try and enlighten you as to why I believe the mice were originally included in the 1950 animated version of this story. So first of all, one of the key things when it comes to the mice is that they're not just friendly pets that Cinderella interacts with because she's gone crazy. Although I'm sure there's a little bit of that as well because she literally has no one to talk to. And as I mentioned in the case of Brandy's Cinderella, she resorts to sitting by her chair and imagining these distant worlds and fantasies that she could be in order to escape even for just a moment. There is definitely an aspect of severe loneliness and perhaps even a bit of a mental breakdown when it comes to this prince character. At the same time, that is not the entirety of what the mice represent. First of all, what's key to note is that in the animated version of the story, the mice are there to juxtapose against the stepmother's pet cat, who's literally literally called Lucifer. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. So the stepmother's pet cat is called Lucifer, and he is a menace to the mice in the same way that the stepmother and her step sisters are a menace to Cinderella. You literally have a cat and mouse chase taking place on the ground, but also amongst the human beings in residence in this estate. And so it stands to reason that the mice are metaphorical representations of how Cinderella has been made to feel small and insignificant and measly in her own household. She's literally been turned into a servant there to just clean up after her stepmother and stepsisters, and not considered as a person in her own right. This is actually mentioned in Brandy's song in Roger and Hammerstein's Cinderella, where she literally says that she's made to feel like a small measly mouse. Like, it's part of her song, and even though that version of the story doesn't feature the talking mice, it is a clear reference to how Cinderella has been belittled in her house. But of course, all of that meaning and all of that nuance and all of that backstory is just completely ignored in the 2021 version of the story. Even though I enjoy some of the talent involved here, in the case of the mice, they're yet another feature that's just stuck on because it's a Cinderella story and you need to have mice. Even though a lot of the Cinderella movies don't actually feature talking mice or any mice of the sort, or oftentimes will just have a cheeky little nod to the mice. Again, probably to avoid the same criticisms that has plagued the 1950 version of the character. Okay, so now let's talk about the prince. Let's talk about the grand prize of the Cinderella story, that of course being the prince himself. And ultimately, Cinderella's biggest dunk is when she ends up marrying the prince, despite what her stepmother and stepsisters thought of her. But in terms of my thoughts on how the prince in the 2021 movie is depicted, I don't like it. Like, unsurprisingly, I don't like it. I don't like this version of Prince Charming in the slightest. Like, please, let's start from the fact that, first of all, he's so annoying. And this is the issue with the prince character just inherently, because in the 1950 version, to be honest, I feel like the romance between Cinderella and the prince was at its weakest. We barely see the prince. He's very distant from Cinderella, and so it's quite unbelievable when they suddenly fall in love with one another, especially by modern day standards. But later down the line, we have seen more recent iterations of the story actually include the prince a bit more in it to ensure that we get more time with Cinderella and the prince, or whatever version of the prince that we have, to establish a more believable relationship. And this film's answer to that is essentially to have the prince secretly run out to the marketplace, which is something that we have seen time and time again. Speaking of Jasmine from Aladdin, okay, he does a Jasmine, and that's something that the princes in Cinderella stories have done previously. But in the case of this film, he doesn't actually meet Cinderella at the marketplace when they're having a conversation. No. He actually is first introduced to her when they have that kind of gathering of crowds to announce the ball, and she is climbing up on a statue of his grandfather in order to gain better access, in order to see the royal family. And that's when he falls in love with her, and like, no thank you, no please, no. I have so many issues with the way that royalty is portrayed in this version of the film. It is clearly portrayed by someone who has no idea how royalty works, and as someone who barely has any idea how royalty works, to be fair, even I can see the glaring issues. Like, did you not even research? Did you not even research? We have people calling the prince Your Majesty. We have people calling the king Your Highness. What is going on? And also another issue, which actually my brother spotted, so you already know, like, it's gone downhill from there. A huge issue when it comes to the 2021 movie is the way that it's written, and particularly the dialogue amongst the members of the royal family, which makes absolutely no sense. Clearly there was absolutely no research on how people in this particular time period would actually speak, although speaking of particular time periods, it doesn't actually actually commit to one. So I guess that's their way out of actually doing any research. But I would say a film that does this spectacularly would definitely be Ever After, which actually commits to this quasi-medieval period or late medieval period, and actually fully commits to the environment, to the point that Drew Barrymore actually has an English accent throughout the film. And even though it's a little bit wobbly at times, I do commend her because it was quite convincing. Like, that film actually committed to an environment and therefore committed to a royal family that feels like it could be historically possible. Like, just whatever. But in the case of the 2021 film, like, where is this royal family coming from? What are they wearing? Where are their clothes from? When are their clothes and comportment and ideas from? Like, nothing makes sense, and it's very clearly illustrated by the way that they speak. And speaking of the king, this film does follow on in the tradition of Cinderella films, where the king is motivated to persuade his son to find a bride, okay, through this lavish ball in order to ascend to the throne. And this isn't something that only the 2021 version of this story is guilty of. As I said, we've seen it before also in Roger and Hammerstein's Cinderella, although that king, who's portrayed by Victor Garber, is like way more lax about it. Like, he doesn't actually care, because he's like, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon, like, it's fine. But that's just it. This line of reasoning doesn't actually make sense, because ultimately the prince is only going to become king when the king dies. Like, when the king actually dies. And so this pressure for the prince to find a bride and have an heir immediately doesn't actually make sense. And I feel like Victor Garber's kind of interpretation of events is the most accurate, especially considering how young he is. Now, I understand this idea of like the prince needs to mature, and I guess I could excuse the idea that they would think the only way to do so would be for him to saddle up someone else in his messed up life. This idea that he has to hurry up and marry someone so that he could become king makes no sense when the king is like right there, perfectly young. And I would like to note, it is a diversion from the 1950 animated version of the story, where the king is mostly motivated to try and get the prince to marry so that he can have grandchildren. If you rewatch that film, he just wants grandchildren. He has fantasies of like playing with his grandkids, and it's actually kind of adorable. Anyways, regardless of the king's motivations to try and push his son to get married, this version of the prince kind of sucks all around, and he especially sucks when it comes to the ball, where after he has persuaded Cinderella to go to the ball as a sort of networking event for her potential business, he then tries to persuade her to get married to him anyway, so that she can sit there and be this glorified, waving, smiling, baby making machine, despite the fact that he knows that she has this dream of working and being this designer. And that ultimately undercuts this kind of romantic development between the characters, because it seems as though he literally has listened to absolutely nothing that she said since the moment that they met. Also, just on a side note over here, speaking of the networking event, we're led to believe that Cinderella only cares about the ball because it is a networking event for her. But at the same time, when she meets the prince initially, as I said, she's climbing on top of a statue of his grandfather just to see the royal family. So like, which one is it? Does she care about the royals or not? So ultimately, I wasn't the biggest fan of the prince. Like, you can keep him. You can keep the prince from the 2021 movie. If I had to choose my favorite prince, okay, my favorite Prince Charming, it wouldn't be the one from the 1950 film, because please, like I said, we barely even know him. They tried to rectify that with the live action version with Richard Madden's iteration of the character, who, like, he was perfectly cut. Oh my goodness. But I have to say, out of all of them, my favorite would have to be Prince Christopher from Roger and Hammerstein's Cinderella, who's portrayed by Paolo Montalban. I don't know if I mispronounced that name. I'll put his name over here on the screen. But mwah. The perfect Prince Charming. The perfect, please. The runner-up though would be the prince from Ever After. I also really enjoyed him, purely because he actually goes through an arc. Like, imagine that. More recently, when it comes to these Cinderella movies, they have definitely made more of an effort to have the prince go through his own character arc and character journey, and that was also seen in A Cinderella Story with Chad Michael Murray's iteration of the character, who's basically basically this popular jock who's being pressured into one way of life that he actually doesn't want to live out. He's essentially like Troy Bolton from the High School Musical before Troy Bolton came along. Okay, like he did it first. But in the case of the prince from Ever After, whose name escapes me at the moment, but I'll put it down on the screen here, he goes through the most significant arc, and he learns so much more when it comes to his interactions with Cinderella, which opens up a whole new perspective on life and the world and his kingdom to him. Okay, so it's at this point in time where I take a look at the timer and see that I've been talking about Cinderella for like an hour and a half. For literally an hour and a half, and we're not even fully done with the whole script, which tells me that this may need to be a 2-part series. I know I don't want to do this either, but I'm gonna have to stop here for the sake of not making this video 5 hours long. So thank you guys so much for tuning in so far. We will continue on with a part 2 of the video, but as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and let me know down in the comments below what your thoughts are so far on my analysis of the Cinderellas, of the ultimate battle royale of Cinderellas, and let me know as well what your thoughts were on the 2021 movie. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in part 2. Bye.